Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. In recent weeks, Turkey's top officials, including President Tayyip Erdogan, voiced rhetoric against the state of Israel for the first time since normalizing diplomatic relations with Jerusalem. To discuss Ankara's approach toward the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and further understand the consequences of its conduct, I'm joined here in the studio by Mr. Eitan Cohen-Yanorochak, who is a research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Professor Hillel Frisch, a senior researcher at Bessa Center, which is at Bar Ilan University.
Hi.
Mr. Oren, please give us a broader understanding of the current situation.
Well, obviously, the Turkish approach to the Arab-Israeli or particularly Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a derivative of the general approach of Turkey and particularly now President Erdogan to what he sees as Turkey's place in the world, in the region, towards the religion of Islam and its place in the affairs of state. And as part of that, he is obviously in the vanguard of a particular branch or stream of Sunni Islam. He sees himself as almost the patron saint, if there are saints in Islam, of Hamas in Gaza. And even though he has mended his fences with Israel a few months ago and has sent an ambassador to Israel, and only this week a very important trade delegation from Turkey has visited Israel, and there are talks about improved trade relations and other financial dealings. Nevertheless, he has not relented in his calls for Israel to give up its policy vis-a-vis, first of all, Jerusalem, the holy Muslim sites, and Gaza.
Well, Professor Frisch, just to put things even closer into context here, prior to a meeting between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Mr. Rami Hamdallah, they had some kind of statement coming out from the president's office in which the president declared that Jerusalem was in a crucial moment of its Islamic nature, and Israel is trying to Judaize Jerusalem to its liking and trying to twist history and so on and so forth, coming to a point where he pretty much condemned Israel as a country conducting some kind of genocide or something. Obviously, we're quite aware, being here in Jerusalem, that that's not the case, but at the same time, there were very harsh words towards Israel, and that just, as Mr. Oren just also stated, normalization of relations between Ankara and Jerusalem, coming to the point where they're trying to mend those wounds that were for pretty long time, if you put it in perspective. How do you see the situation?
Well, I think this is a set pattern. I think Erdogan, as an ideologue and as a devout Muslim, as a Muslim Brotherhood type, is anti-Jewish and blatantly anti-Israel. He hates both. Really a personal passion. At the same time, he is a realist. He knows that there are vested interests and he has to promote especially the economic relationship between Israel and Turkey. So he continuously plays on both these sides, and often they clash. This is not the first time. I mean, the first time was in Davos in 2009 when he attacked Peres, the former prime minister, the late Israeli prime minister, who was known as one of the great architects of the Oslo peace process. And I think that there's an added value. There's a value added when it comes to Jerusalem. He's basically in competition with Egypt over being the leader of the Sunni Muslim world in the area. And he knows that Sisi is in a way, is the head of a more secular state. And this is his way of outbidding Egypt, whom he dislikes intensely, and Sisi personally, because he overthrew a Muslim Brotherhood president.
Mr. Cohen-Yanorochak, when we're looking at President Erdogan, he's a brilliant person. He's a person who is very calculated, knows exactly what he wants, does things that sometimes if you dig deeper into the political strategies that he's maneuvering, he's beyond comprehending the situation. And as Professor Frisch also stated, he's a realist. He knows what he needs to do, how to get what he wants, and to move forward. How does a person, such a smart individual, come and state those things with knowing that there are certain repercussions of those words, knowing that he might get some kind of counterbalance from Israel, which looks at this? Of course, Israel is interested in calming the things down, but there are concerns on the Israeli side. There are things that actually put things in perspective for it, doesn't it?
First of all, I need to tell you something. When we are looking at the export and import balance between the two countries, it's always on increase. And the deterioration in the relationship between Israel and Turkey did not have a real impact on the import and export balance. And when we are looking at the balance, Turkey is enjoying a relative advantage in this case. So he knows that even if the relations between the two countries will experience another deterioration, this will not have a huge impact on the relations, and he's not going to get punished. That's the issue. And I would like to again make another point. When we are looking and when we are talking about this normalization issue, this normalization is not a genuine one. I'm always making this comparison with the normalization with Russia. Turkey normalized its relations with Israel and Russia, only with a 1-day difference. And since then, President Erdogan met with Vladimir Putin at least 5 or 6 times. But gentlemen, please remind me, did he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? No. Reuven Rivlin? No. He just asked Mr. Rivlin to interfere into this Muazzin law. And if you ask me why is the timing? Because it was the Foundations Week in Istanbul, in Turkey, and he had to say something when it comes to Jerusalem. Because as Professor Frisch told, and also Mr. Oren told, he sees himself as the leader of the moderate Sunni state, of the moderate Sunni world. So in this case, he's saying, I am the descendant of Suleiman the Magnificent. We are the grandchildren of the Ottoman Empire. So, of course, we do have a say on Jerusalem, and nobody should be surprised on that. And that's why he thinks that Israel initiated this latest cycle, and he is just responding.
Mr. Oren.
This year marks the 500 years anniversary of the conquest of Jerusalem by the Ottomans, by the same Suleiman the Magnificent, who still has a street named in his honor, adjacent to the walls of the city, not the Wailing Wall, but the walls of the
fortification walls,
the fortification of the city, which the Ottomans built, and it is 100 years since the Ottomans were expelled from then Palestine by the British. Perhaps it is the right time for President Erdogan to be invited to see Israel, to see Jerusalem. This is a historic event. Perhaps he could be
for being expelled. For being expelled?
No, for the 500 years.
For 500 years, yeah, might be, years, but not for the 100 years.
Not for the 100 years. We can mention that in passing. Now, Israel has always known, since 1967, that there will be some Muslim intervention in the affairs of the holy sites. There was, and perhaps there still is, a committee of 3 monarchs, 3 Muslim monarchs, the Jordanian monarch, the Saudi monarch, and the Moroccan monarch. Now, if Erdogan is now a sultan, perhaps he could be invited to join this group in order to have some say in the affairs of Jerusalem. It is very important for him to have his personal dignity exemplified. And we are now marking 7 years, just one more anniversary, since the Mavi Marmara affair. It's long overdue for the countries to look ahead and not dwell on past grievances.
I think this would be a grievous mistake. I think that Erdogan has a vision of renewing the Ottoman Empire. It's also part of his effacement of the Ataturk secular legacy. And he would very much like to turn Israel into a dhimmi state, into a protected state. Most Israelis feel that Israeli statehood is for real independence, and we don't want the Ottoman Empire back.
Mr. Chaya Nowotchak?
Well, the dhimmi state, I don't think that Erdogan is trying to exercise an influence on Israel. On contrary, he wants to basically show the Israelis that if they are going to do if they are going to take new steps in the Holy Land, as he said in his latest statement, nobody can even move a stone in the Holy Land. That was, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was taken also from the new Hamas document. The same expression was also used there. So in this case, I don't think that he wants to take Israel under his protection. Instead, he wants to, let's say, use his diplomatic relations with Israel in order to maximize the interests of the Muslims.
Nevertheless, when I had some conversations with good Turkish friends of mine who are also connected to the government in Turkey, and during those conversations, they did specify how important Jerusalem is for them and how much it was important also for the Ottoman Empire not to build significant structures that will diminish the importance of Jerusalem and the holiness of Jerusalem. Could it be that President Erdogan is truly sincere about his worries pertaining to Jerusalem? And if so, does he think that calling on millions of Muslims aligns his interest with trying to lead the Muslim world or the moderate Sunni Muslim world in achieving some kind of significant perception for Jerusalem within Israel or within the aspired renewed Ottoman Empire to that sense?
There is no doubt regarding his sincerity. He is, as was said, a devout Muslim, and for him, Jerusalem is very important. There is no basis for these concerns. Israel is not going to do anything detrimental to the Muslim sites and especially to Al-Aqsa. But the problem is that if Turkey used to be a Muslim power but with a national outlook under Ataturk and under the various military regimes which de facto or de jure ruled Turkey, now it's a Muslim power first and foremost. And the Turkish-Israeli relationship blossomed when they had a common enemy such as Syria, and in the late 1950s, there were secret negotiations regarding a common operation against Syria, because Syria at the time posed a threat to both. Also, Israel in the 1970s had so much leverage in Washington, especially on Capitol Hill, and there was such a powerful Greek lobby that Turkey needed Israel to speak for it in Washington. This is not the case now because Turkey can speak on its own, and Israel does not always have such leverage, especially during the Obama years and because of the split between the Republicans and the Democrats. Israel can no longer deliver Capitol Hill for anyone, including itself, and not for Turkey. So the relationship has changed, and it has changed because of the way Erdogan perceives Turkey now, which does not conform to the way Israel would like Turkey to behave, and therefore Israel found new allies such as Greece and Cyprus.
Professor Frisch.
I think we're being much too sympathetic to Erdogan. He has a long history already of rabid anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli statements. This is just one more. If we need to give anyone any kind of footstep in our capital, in Israel's capital, it should be the Jordan, with whom we have a lot of dealings and some control. Certainly not an inimical personality Erdogan.
Nevertheless, there are strategic interests here for both countries.
Yes, the major strategic interest with Turkey is that it's a bulwark against the spread of Iranian Shiite influence. I mean, that's the biggest common denominator between us, that we're against the Shiite heterodox arc from Tehran to Beirut.
There was another one.
So that means that we shouldn't burn fences, but it doesn't mean that we should promote a stronghold in Jerusalem, a foothold in Jerusalem.
Another one was the veto power that Turkey had over Israel's participation in NATO affairs. Because as a member of NATO, which is built on consensus, as long as Turkey was actively hostile towards Israel, Israel was left out of active endeavor and other NATO activities, which all the other members wanted Israel to take part in, but Turkey blocked. So right now, this particular obstacle is out of the way.
Mr. Cohen Yanarochak, wasn't also the gas findings that Israel had, the Leviathan reservoirs and so on, also a strategic interest of Turkey to mend those wounds and try and build on an economic approach?
Indeed, and that's why Israeli Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz paid a visit, and he basically came together with his Turkish counterpart Berat Albayrak. And it was the first ministerial level meeting between the two sides. And in this case, it is still doable. It is still the cheaper option. But the latest statement of President Erdogan is again shaking all of these plans, because many Israeli decision makers after such a statement are tending to hear more Greek and Cypriot option as a more viable and long-term option. Maybe it's more expensive, maybe it's harder to build, but such a plan from an Israeli point of view maybe will be much more logical for Israel. Strategically, right? But of course, in order to maximize Israeli interests, I think the Israeli-Turkish pipeline should still be not ignored. That's what I believe.
Nevertheless, Mr. Oren, when we're looking at Turkey, Turkey has voiced on several occasions, including just recently by its Prime Minister Binali Yildirim, its sound support for the Islamist Hamas organization in the Gaza Strip, and internationally recognized terrorist organizations operating in the Palestinian enclave. Nevertheless, when Israel seeks to somehow normalize the relations under the auspices of U.S. President Donald Trump, do you believe that Turkey could play a role in trying to establish some kind of rapprochement between the Western-backed Palestinian Authority and the Gazan rulers of Hamas?
It could, but probably wouldn't. And there are other options, such as Egypt or even Qatar, should it decide to play an honest broker rather than a pro-Hamas mediator. Israelis have been under the illusion that this is the old Turkey where Israelis loved to go on vacation. It's a short plane ride from Israel, a Mediterranean climate which Israelis are used to. But the reality is that it is not too different than what happened in Iran in the late 1970s. Israel was very friendly with Iran when the Shah was in power, and for the last almost 40 years has been under the hostile stare of the Islamic Republic. Israel has been very friendly with other Turkish regimes, but ever since Erdogan and the AK party came to power, it's 15 years already, 2002, relations have never been good. Sometimes they have been very bad. Sometimes they have been moderately bad.
Nevertheless, Mr. Cohen Yanarochak did specify that the economic aspect of this relationship continues to grow and continues to improve.
Surely there are also financial dealings under the table with Iranian entities too. This does not mean a lot diplomatically. It means that each side sees its self-interest in gaining as much financial gain from it. And therefore, the industries in both countries have a thriving relationship. Israel needs Turkish contractors, Turkish workers, entrepreneurs, and vice versa, even though, as you are saying, the balance is in Turk's favor. But it doesn't mean that diplomatically Israel can count on a rapprochement with Turkey.
Professor Frisch.
I think the economic situation, the difference between Iran and Turkey is crucial to explain why Iran, it was total rupture, and here it won't. It'll just be a problematic relationship, but it'll be a continuous relationship, because in Iran they had an oil commodity that they could sell at any cost. So the Ayatollahs could play it alone. Turkey is an internationalized economy without natural resources. It needs commerce, it needs trade, and it can't give up the Israeli relationship. And so we're going to have a continuous relationship punctured by ruptures because of his ideological, anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish bent.
Mr. Cohen-Yonadolchak, nevertheless, I'd like to ask something specific, and I'd like also to hear what you have to say about this, of course. But does Erdogan have dealings with the Jewish community in Turkey? Because as far as I know, he does have some positive dealings with them to a certain degree.
Sure. First of all, I need to emphasize here, Mr. Erdogan is differentiating his relations with the Jewish community and Israel. And of course, he's also advocating that this is how he cannot be stamped as an anti-Semite. For instance, he repaired the great synagogue in the city of Edirne, where my grandfather did his bar mitzvah. He celebrated his bar mitzvah there, for instance. And it was a rubble. And thanks to Mr. Erdogan, just 2 days ago, Israeli singer David Deor gave a concert there. So it's a huge event for the Jewish community. I mean, it's very ironic, but when we are looking at the synagogues, the Jewish community is accepting even more and more governmental aid from the Justice and Development Party of Erdogan. But when we were looking, when the secular governments were there, it was a lot harder to receive such governmental aids. And regarding the comparison between the Iranians and Turks, I would like to make a very good point, in my opinion. Maybe it's not good to say a very good point. I'm not that objective, right? But still. The thing is, the Turks are very much pragmatic. For instance, they are not recognizing the state of Cyprus. But if a Turkish football team should play, according to UEFA, with a Cypriot Greek team, they are flying to the island, they are playing the game with them, and they are crossing the border to the country that they do not recognize, and then they are coming back home. Can you imagine that Maccabi Tel Aviv will go to Tehran to play a game with the Iranians? No. The thing is, the Turks are super pragmatic, and they can maintain even relations with a country that they are not.
They dislike.
They dislike, and they don't even recognize.
Mr. Olin?
This is a good opening, not only a good point, but a good opening should Israel expand some of the privileges it is giving the population in Gaza, including perhaps this artificial harbor that one of Israel's ministers has been espousing. Israel Katz, the transportation and intelligence minister, has been espousing for a long time. Turkey has taken upon itself, and this is what caused the Mavi Marmara incident, has taken upon itself to provide for the welfare of the population in Gaza. If Israel could give Turkey some credit, not in anything that will have an impact, a negative impact on Israel's security, but could bring Turkey in so that Erdogan personally and Turkey as a nation would get some credit for an improvement in the livelihood in Gaza, so much the better, even though Professor Frisch does not want any Turkish footprint.
It was also done. It was already done. The
humanitarian
ships were sent from Turkey.
Yes.
Israeli government.
There was also a
Israeli
ministerial.
is providing.
Israel allowed a Turkish ministerial committee to study the electricity problem in Gaza and to come up with solutions. So they're definitely allowing some kind of foothold in Gaza, but it comes at a cost. What is the cost? It angers Egypt and the Palestinian Authority and probably Saudi Arabia. So
life is tough.
So life is tough. I mean, so it's tough.
Well, we're unfortunately coming to an end of the program, so I'd like to give each and every one of you the opportunity to give some kind of speculation of where things are going. Professor Frisch, we'll start with you.
I would say that we have to maintain as normal a relationship with Turkey as possible, but it's going to be ruptured by that ideological bent that Erdogan and his supporters have against both Jews and against the state of Israel as the state of the Jewish people.
And on a regional aspect, do you think any implications will arise on the matter?
No, Israel has to weigh continuously its relationship with Turkey in relationship to Egypt, which is also a very important player, and Russia. So it's a very complicated situation.
Mr. Koyan-Rochek?
In order to call this normalization a genuine normalization, so I need to see some trust-building measures. I mean, bilateral visits, but not on ministerial level, prime minister, president. And then I will be convinced that this normalization is a real normalization. Otherwise, it will be like an absence of a clash.
Do you believe, though, that the situation will head to that way, or do you think that the situation will maintain and a certain status quo will arise?
It's also up to a little Israel, because the Muazzin law is very projected very negatively in Turkey. And I know that in Israel, the Israeli Jewish press, when we are looking at the Muazzin law, we are talking about the loudspeakers. But when I'm looking at the Turkish press, nobody's talking about the loudspeakers. Instead, all of the Turkish media is concentrated on the rumor that Israel is trying to bar the Muslim prayers for the call of prayer in the morning. So,
Mr. Oren, can you just give very shortly what's the Muazzin law, and then
yes, the Muazzin law calls for lowering of the sound level for any public
call to prayer.
Not only call to prayer. This is the way, of course, the Muslims explain it, but it is focused on that, even though it is couched in other more general terms, and Muslims were offended by it. Now, the buzzword in the Middle East now is deconflicting, or the avoidance of a clash. Israel and Turkey should take care to deconflict themselves. And one can optimistically say that the end of the Erdogan regime is in sight. It's 2029. It's only 12 years from now. We will be meeting here and be able to analyze what has happened.
Maybe discuss his next term, but this is all the time that we have for today. So I'd like to thank Professor Hillel Frisch for coming here, Mr. Amir Oren, and Mr. Chai Eitan Koyan-Rochek. Thank you so very much. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time. TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you're blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.